Buzz. No. So yes, I will introduce Chandler Cox and Alma Soto from Libnova, and you've been supporters of the DPC for some time now. We're delighted to have you along. But Chandler, I believe the first time we met was last week, so it was wonderful to meet you, and Alma as well. So I'm going to let you introduce yourselves a bit more and a bit better, and tell us a bit more about your products and your services.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And hey, everyone. It's awesome to see some familiar names and well, we can't see faces, I guess, on our side, but familiar names as well joining us today. And before I introduce myself and we dig into a little bit of the content that we prepared together and a few things that we wanted to highlight, I did want to thank the DPC. Sarah and Michael and Ellie and team have been fantastic hosts for these sessions. They're very fun for us to be able to share some of the exciting things that are happening in our world, but also share maybe some lessons learned, especially around our topic over the past 2 weeks, which has been pre-procurement, right? So how to prepare before procuring a digital preservation platform. So we'll expand on that a little bit today. Um, and then jump into a few kind of live use cases of areas that at least we believe are really important to consider whenever you're considering investing in digital preservation and a digital preservation solution. Um, Before we get in to that, though, quick introductions. So my name is Chandler Cox. For the folks that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, I lead what we call our global partnership teams here at Libnova. That spans the individuals that partner with our current customers to ensure that they are properly supported and get the most out of our solutions, but also prospective customers as well, which is a big part, of course, of our topic in terms of pre-procurement. I'm joined by a colleague of mine, a fantastic colleague of mine today, Alma Soto. Alma, I don't know if you wanted to come off mute really quick and maybe introduce yourself to the audience.
Course. Hi, everyone. My name is Alma Masoto. I am part of the solutions team here at Libnova. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much, everybody. Um, yeah, very excited.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alma. Um, okay, so we have a short session today, um, but wanted to go ahead and jump into our topic of conversation. Of course, we all know we're here for the DPC Supporter Spotlight webinar series. Thank you again to Sarah for allowing us to kick off the session this afternoon. Whenever we were preparing for this, the one thing that I wanted to do was to keep this practical and focused on what institutions should think and organizations should think through before maybe beginning a procurement process for a digital preservation solution. I'll share a few lessons that we've seen and lessons learned that we've seen across different organizations and evaluations over the years. And then we'll also close with a short demonstration tied to some of those considerations that we'll talk about together. Um, Very briefly, though, by way of introduction, for the folks that aren't familiar, so Libnova works with universities, archives, libraries, government bodies, and cultural organizations across more than 20 countries. I mention that mainly because the procurement themes that we'll discuss today tend to come up across many different institution types, even when collections and constraints may differ from institution to institution or organization to organization. And again, not harping on this too much today, given our topic of conversation, but just so folks are grounded at a high level, Live Safe, which is our digital preservation solution, is Libnova's digital preservation platform that we supply to our customers. It's designed to help institutions bring digital content into a managed preservation environment, organize it in a way that fits your collections and workflows, and preserve it over time so that it remains authentic, usable, and accessible in the future. And for us, that spans the core preservation life cycle across mainly the core main pillars that you see on your screen, right? So ingestion, Of course, preservation, there's a lot that goes into that, as we all know. Curation, and then ultimately access as well. Again, though, for today, the point is less to go deep into product detail, although we're always happy to for folks that are familiar. Feel free to get in touch with me or the team. But today's really about more about framing the kinds of capabilities that buyers should be looking for in any platform. Things like openness, interoperability, standards alignment, deployment flexibility, and also governance. Okay. So really for us, I was preparing as I mentioned for this, and I wanted to try to summarize where Libnova tends to be strongest and the best fit for our customers. And we're often a strong fit for institutions that are managing, a mixed and growing collection, maybe a diverse collection that needs flexibility in terms of archival structure, ingest methods, and other areas in terms of their digital preservation repository, rather than being forced into maybe a rigid model. We also typically stand out when teams want automation that improves efficiency, but without losing the oversight of those processes. So we use, and it's not a Libnova term by any means, but we often talk about controlled automation. So how can we leverage automation to drive efficiency, but still have control over those processes? Um, Also, give institutions really, the long-term control through things like open standards. So we won't dig too deep into it today, but things like OCFL and other standards and frameworks that folks may be familiar with. But also exit strategy and ensuring that we're avoiding vendor lock-in. That was a big topic for the folks that attended us last week. And then lastly, for many organizations, it also means moving away maybe from fragmented workflows and taking a practical first step into digital preservation potentially without limiting future maturity. Okay, so some things that we talked, and this is a little bit of a recap, I think, in a summary to some of the things we talked about last week together. But in our experience, one of the best ways to improve a procurement process is to get clarity in a few areas before even engaging vendors too deeply. Because oftentimes a lot of the things you see on your screen are going to be things that probably a lot of us that you'll hear from today will be asking and wanting to learn more about to ensure that, one, we're a good fit, but also that we can address your needs uniquely. So first, your collections, right? Your workflows, your operating constraints, of course, depending on what type of institution or organization you are. And ultimately, right, long-term goals, right? Why are we embarking on this journey? You don't really need every answer maybe on day one, but the clearer that we are in these areas, the more productive the overall evaluation process tends to be, at least from our experience. Um, so what does the process typically look like? I know maybe folks may already know this or be familiar, but I thought I'd outline that in a high level. So you kind of know what you're going into typically as part of any type of procurement process for a solution. And this is certainly a simplified version um, of what a practical evaluation and onboarding journey often looks like. The devil is certainly in the details here, as a lot of us know. But it usually begins with exploratory conversations and also requirements discovery. The one thing I'll mention here, and I can't remember who mentioned it last week, Sarah, but maybe it was the folks at Archivum. They had mentioned that, oftentimes these exploratory conversations can be really helpful to illuminate to organizations and institutions that, hey, we have this problem. We believe that we want this solution to solve this problem, but there might be a better way to solve that problem that we may just not be aware of. And so oftentimes these exploratory conversations that typically are happening before any type of formal procurement process starts can help to illuminate some of that. It moves into solution design and scope alignment, um, followed by proposal and procurement, of course, and then implementation planning and rollout. I think the important point is that a good process should reduce risk, create internal alignment within the organization or institution, and set up a realistic and achievable, first phase in terms of any type of project. Okay. Before we take a look at a few things, I wanted to try to pull a list together of maybe my top tips for buyers. If I were in your shoes, what would I be considering? And certainly this is not exhaustive, but I tried to take a different angle with some of these. Um, and if I had to really condense this into a few recommendations, these would probably be the main ones. So I think first is test flexibility against your real world workflows. I talked earlier about controlled automation. Let's do our best to leverage automation where we can, but still have control over those workflows that we have to solve our needs. Um, Clarify your exit strategy early. This came up a lot last week. So I know it feels odd to talk about how to leave before maybe you've started working together. But of course, as we know in our world, it's the nature of our work in digital preservation. So clarify your exit strategy early and really pressure test that. Look for open standards that matter in practice. So of course, we're all familiar with a lot of the digital preservation standards, but really here at the Libnova, we're expanding beyond that and looking to address, broader frameworks and needs like OCFL that I mentioned earlier. Um, Also, storage strategy into the process early. Um, Being thoughtful around storage, leaning on, um, you know, uh, uh, vendors in the space, maybe to even supply recommendations there, thoughts for different perspectives. And then lastly, choose a solution that solves for today, but without limiting tomorrow's growth. We know that the world around us is changing very, very rapidly. And so we know that our needs potentially are going to change as we look forward 10, 20, 5, 10, 20 years down the line. So ensuring that not only your needs for today can be solved, but also planning for the future as well. Okay. Before we wrap and go to Q&A, Alma and I were preparing and we were talking to each other and rather than leave these ideas right at a high level, thought it'd be fun to maybe show 3 short examples in practice. Right. So flexibility. So we talked about that, right? How can we have flexibility in a solution that can address our needs around digital preservation? Long-term control and exit strategy. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And then lastly, storage flexibility across environments, right? Just one example of what that could look like. And these are all areas where it is usually much more useful to see how something works, maybe than just hear me talk about it. So with that said, Alma, maybe I'll pass the virtual ball over to you and we'll take a quick look with the remaining 8-10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chandler. All right, let's begin looking into flexibility. And for that, I do want to briefly explain how we can organize the repository and the content in the platform, as this is easily explained thanks to this image that you can hopefully see in your screens right now. So let's think of LibSafe as if it were a library. In a library, there are bookcases, which in the platform translate to nodes. In each bookcase, we have shelves, which represent the subnodes. And then finally, because we're very organized, we have boxes, and it's inside of the boxes where we put the content in. So our books, our images, our documents, our audiovisual material. And those boxes are the containers on the platform. These are the 3 main concepts that we need to be aware of in order to understand and see the possibilities when it comes to organizing our structure and content in LibSafe. In any case, let's see an example of this metaphorical library, and this would be it. This is our archival structure. So on the left, we can see our structure of nodes and subnodes. And as you can probably see, we even have subnodes of subnodes. So it is possible to have this level of depth in this repository, in our repository structure. And then at any point in this node and subnode structure, we have on the right our containers, container in this case, singular. And it's important to note that there's no restriction on the number of nodes and subnodes and containers that can be created, thereby offering a significant adaptability and, of course, flexibility when it comes to the design of a repository. Now, from our containers, we can upload content directly using the web interface. Well, we have two options here. We can use the upload button, but we can also perform a very simple, straightforward drag and drop. In this particular case, I have a folder here with some files and a subfolder. And so what I am just going to do, as I said, is a drag and drop. And it's important to note here that when content is uploaded into LibSafe, regardless of the source or method used, it goes through an automatic ingestion workflow. And this means that all files uploaded in the system will get characterized, identified, validated, scanned for viruses. The necessary checksums for integrity checks will be generated, and their embedded metadata and full text will get extracted as well. That being said, if we open the folder now, you will see that the platform has automatically recreated the complete folder structure. And this is very important to also related to flexibility. And that is that LibSafe accepts all file formats and structures. Our goal is to help institutions preserve their data immediately, eliminating the need to waste time on their local machines, on their computers, adapting the structures, adapting the formats for the platform to then accept. So we encourage organizations to upload their content first, allowing the platform to automatically apply a solid initial level of preservation with this automatic ingestion workflow. And then afterwards, they can curate their content to achieve the desired shape for long-term preservation. Another method that can be used to upload content into LibSafe is through our RESTful API. So our API is fully documented, included in the price, and of course, it can be used not only to upload, but also to perform other actions around the system. And lastly, we can also use any tool compatible with the S3 protocol, such as S3 Browser, FileZilla, the AWS command line interface, and because indeed, one of the pillars of our exit strategy, which assures that institutions that they will have access to their content, is that from day one, they are given the credentials for their S3 bucket directly within LibSafe. They can always check how their content is preserved directly in the storage layer, and of course, then export all the content exactly as it is preserved. As you can see here in this case, I'm connected to the bucket behind this platform and can access my container with my content right here using S3 Browser. Long story short, there is no vendor login. Apart from providing the credentials to the S3 bucket from day one, in order to provide a transparent exit strategy for an institution, as well as flexibility in terms of storage, we offer the option to create replicas of the content using the S3 Mirror module. This replica is very easy to perform. It is done only using two metadata descriptors. So do I want to create a replica of this content? Yes. To where? Well, we have options. And of course, in this case, I'm only changing metadata for one object. We have easier ways of doing this process in bulk. For the sake of the example, this is just one example. So LibSafe now knows that this content can be replicated together with its metadata and the premise events will have to be replicated to another S3 compatible cloud, Google Cloud, Oracle, even another AWS S3 bucket, or to an on-prem storage, and also its integrity will be checked. Finally, optionally, the automatic creation of an OCFL repository can be enabled, like we mentioned. This ensures that our entire archive conforms to the Oxford Common File Layout standard, which is self-describing and provides immutable versions. This means that the entire repository can be extracted easily following OCFL mechanisms, making it simple to integrate with any other system capable of interpreting the format. Well, we hope this very brief demo was helpful, and passing the mic over to you again, Chandler. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Alma, for highlighting a few of those examples live within the solution. Um, I know we've had a few questions in the chat, which have been fantastic. But Michael, Sarah, I know we're a couple minutes early, but happy to address any additional questions from the group.
Well, thanks for that, guys. Yeah, as you say, well done for keeping to time. That was excellent. And as you say, we've got a little bit of Slack built into the program. And I was just wondering whether, for the benefit of those who may have missed them in the chat or have struggle with things scrolling by as they go along, whether you just wanted to just pick up the questions we've had already. So Paul was talking about you cover the sort of things that you felt it was important for people to know about in advance before they do as part of their procurement. But he was saying, well, what about the stakeholders? What about building user stories? Do you want to expand a little bit on the answer you gave to Paul there?
Yeah, as usual, Paul is very spot on. I mean, stakeholders are extremely important. Needless to say, right? As part of, I mean, honestly, any potential project or initiative or strategy or procurement, in our example. For me, and I mentioned this to Paul in the chat, I think there's many reasons why, but oftentimes, and we actually did a session on this at Libnova. We had a roundtable discussion around building the business case. And I think, it starts way back then, in terms of internal stakeholder alignment, across the institution or organization, but also, of course, with leadership. It's crucial for buy-in early regarding this type of initiative, and also successful project support later on. And Paul's exactly right in terms of user stories. Potential future users, predicting with that crystal ball. But I think it's, ideally, I think for us, we want to understand the unique challenges of everyone that touches this type of process, because that gives us on the vendor side visibility into how things are interconnected potentially, but also, of course, the value that we could potentially provide to the different teams or internal stakeholders within an institution or organization. So I totally agree about internal stakeholder alignment and engagements. It's crucial.
Sorry, Chandler, if I may. So were you saying this is like a kind of a regular session or a course that you offer to anybody, or is this a process you engage with once somebody is already sort of kind of shortlisted you or perhaps even committed to purchasing Libnova?
Yeah, it's a good question, Michael. I'll give you the worst possible answer. It depends. I'd say typically though, so the first thing I'll mention, whenever we say the word procurement, sometimes that means different things to different folks. You can tell from my accent, I'm based in the States. Oftentimes we may not have the same exact rigor or compliance or regulatory requirements to go through a formal RFP process, right? It might not be needed depending on the type of organization or institution that you are. So that may look different than a formalized RFP process. But Michael, to answer your question, I think mostly what happens is during those exploratory conversations that occur typically as a first step, prior to a formal procurement RFP launching. That's usually where, at least on the Libnova side, we like to have those conversations with stakeholders. So we want to understand, of course, their current challenges, of course, their desired outcomes, but getting input from multiple folks, or maybe a few folks that have done that legwork themselves to gather some of that stakeholder input and feedback internally. Oftentimes can help us both go in eyes wide open to a potential partnership, which is really what we're exploring together.
Okay, thanks, Chandler. And then you also had a question from Cornelia Kunzel about migration, and it's kind of like, where does that fit into the process? And do you recommend sort of people, or do you normally see people migrating directly out of one system into your system, or do they do it via storage, or what form does that tend to take?
Yeah. So again, it varies based on where you're starting from, right? I mean, for some folks, maybe you're, already on storage or, already just storing, but not preserving. I mean, of course, we could have
Yeah.
maybe a topic around that, Michael, next quarter. But if we're just storing, right, on AWS, for example, there's actually a lot of efficiencies that we provide because we're an AWS partner in terms of potentially not even having to move any of your data within within your own storage environments. So that's a potential there. So maybe no migration. But you're exactly right, and Cornelia is right as well in terms of migration. We need to be very thoughtful about this. We have a dedicated phase as part of our implementation process where we really want to, it's a workshop, so we understand your collection. And we want to provide support during that migration process so that we can bring in data organized in a clean way. I mean, Alma just touched on very, very briefly some of the flexibility that we have around the archival structure. But absolutely, migration is very important. It typically occurs after the solution has been configured. But it's a dedicated step within our traditional project plans that we partner on with customers.
Thanks for that, Chandler. I don't know if this is for you or for Alma, but Emily's asking whether you could say a little bit more about the benefits of OCFL versus other standards, which is a potential biggie. But
Yeah. Well, and Alma, I don't know if you want me to kind of speak high level, and Emily, we're happy to talk more offline. And I don't know if any of the OCFL folks are here on the line. So hopefully I'll do OCFL justice today. But I think it's really exciting for us for a couple reasons. One, it's really important. I mean, even just us being here, right, as part of the DPC is important to us here at Libnova. But also, doing our best to staying ahead of modern frameworks and standards that are emerging in the industry, but also standards like OCFL that help with portability and exit strategy and avoiding vendor lock-in. So, Emily, I touched on a couple of those, but I think the benefits of OCFL, if one of the benefits is the portability. So the actual ability for you to take, with Libnova, for example, and LibSafe, extract and take your OCFL aligned collection, and it is describable and understandable, right, as it is, but it also can be ported to other places if needed down the line. I don't know, Alma, anything else? You think that's okay for now?
That sounds wonderful.
Cool.
yeah, and I think Paul was endorsing that in the chat as well by just this one word, portability. That's what's it, not
Yeah, Paul's spot
avoiding
on.
data lock-in. This is a question from me then, whilst other people think of something they'd like to put in the chat, take advantage of having Libnova here whilst you've got them. But and it invites an it depends answer, but you kind of characterized your typical customers and the kind of, I guess they fall into quite well-known or distinct sectors. But so, how long is a piece of string, but how long is the typical procurement process? How long does it take from sort of first contact from people saying, okay, yeah, okay, we're thinking of purchasing Libnova through to going live, and how much back and forth do you tend to see between yourselves and working with customers?
Yeah, good question. I'd say I give two quick scenarios. So, sometimes depending on the organization, institution, location, regulatory requirements, et cetera, folks can purchase a solution without going through a formal RFP, process. So obviously, without a formal RFP process, that can be much quicker. right? Typically, it's an evaluation stage. Typically, we're still evaluating the folks that are in the space, but it's more of an in-house effort, right, to understand which solution fits your needs the best. Typically, for those, I mean, it's within 3 to 6 months, oftentimes for us. Now, the from start to finish, and of course, a lot of engagement. Oftentimes, we're helping build the case if we need to, and understand requirements and ensuring those requirements align with outcomes in our solutions. But from a traditional RFP, a kind of tender process, um, I think probably the answer is longer than anyone wants. I think probably on both sides. I know oftentimes when you finally get approval to launch a tender, you have all the excitement, but you're really looking forward to get started. But I think probably for us, probably 6 to 12 months from start to finish on average. A lot of dependencies there. But oftentimes, maybe from those exploratory conversations, maybe before the RFP gets released. Of course, when the RFP releases, oftentimes there's written responses that are provided by the vendors. There's Q&A periods. There's usually a demonstration, use case type of period. Oftentimes, there's maybe scopes of work or project plans that are developed together. Um, and so yeah, it varies. I can tell you from the vendor side, we would love to go quicker. We are here and willing and able, but of course we want to ensure that we support our prospective clients and clients to make sure that they go in eyes wide open and make an informed decision regarding the solution that they purchase.
Thanks for that. And I see Paul has just posted in the Slack, sorry, in the chat channel, sort of a bit of an advert for
I
his
love it, Paul.
DPS procurement service through JISC, if you're lucky enough to live in the UK and be able to draw on the services of JISC. That's something very much worth considering. I guess a last one, perhaps picking up. Oh, UK and Europe, says Paul. Feel free to, with an exclamation mark. Have you noticed any, again, it might just be the reverse of what you were outlining in the start of it, but have you noticed if there's any sort of more common pitfalls in the procurement process or things you see time and again that make slap the forehead, we're going to have to go through this again with customer X or customer Y? You don't need to name names, obviously, but are there any commonalities, or do you feel people are sufficiently prepared, perhaps, or?
I tell you what, I mean, a lot of the resource, at least from my experience, I'm someone relatively new to the digital preservation world, all things considered. And I think, Paul just gave a resource to us in the chat, but I think a lot of the resources that the DPC leads the charge with has really helped to inform a lot of organizations and institutions regarding some of these processes and those types of things. So I'd say for the most part, folks are pretty well prepared. I think I'll go back to something I mentioned earlier. Oftentimes, we have a problem, we have a challenge within our organization and institution. But, we have a phrase, or I use a phrase here in the States, if I only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so oftentimes, if we don't have the opportunity to maybe have some of those exploratory conversations before we start building out requirements and even must type of requirements, it can impact maybe the way that we go about our evaluation because there's things I don't know for sure. Alma can tell you. And so I think having those preliminary conversations early, and even maybe learning, how folks are solving unique challenges today, can help inform some of those requirements that we have later.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chandler. Thanks, Alma.